So welcome. Let's start right now. As you know, this table is organized through the UNESCO Chair on Learning Sciences, which is around skills and professions of the future. And we will be talking about exploring creative skills, occupations, evolution, and extinction of the different occupations. This is done in partnership with the Learning Planet Institute and Université Paris-Cité. The chair combines some research, pedagogy, and technology to empower teachers, researchers, and practitioners in shaping a learning society committed to a sustainable future. So it is driven by a belief that youth, lifelong learning, and collective intelligence are the most powerful forces for positive transformation. And the chair's mission is to unlock these levers and inspire lasting change across communities. Today, and even more specifically today, we find ourselves in a transformative moment that is shaped by a lot of technological advancements, environmental crises, political deep transformations, and societal shifts in general. And so this forces us to rapidly redefine work and education in order to have an as bright future as possible. So the future of work is being reimagined as digital, social, demographic, and environmental transitions drive change across every sector. These transformations are simultaneously phasing out some traditional roles while paving the way for new uncharted professions. And in this context, creative skills and adaptability will become indispensable. And our ability to anticipate and prepare for these shifts will determine our collective resilience. So whether you are an educator or a policymaker, a learner, or even a parent, this roundtable aims to explore how we can better equip the workforce with the skills that are aligned with what we need to face the challenges. Through our discussion, we will explore how educational models can evolve to nurture the creativity and adaptability needed for an uncertain and yet opportunity-rich future. And so today, I'm Irina Nikolaeva. I'm the Senior Product Manager for Educational Tools in the Learning Planet Institute. And I shall be hosting this roundtable during this afternoon. Throughout our time together, I encourage you to actively participate through the chat. There will be a Q&A session in the end where we will be able to answer your questions. And please also share your thoughts and engage with the speakers whenever you want to. Let's now introduce our panel of speakers today. Let me begin by introducing our youngest speakers, Louise Massacrier and Zoe Lina Vehmeyer. I hope I get it right. You are both students studying on the Master Air digital program, Master Air degree. That is an interdisciplinary research and education program run by the Learning Planet Institute and the Université Paris-Cité. Welcome. And you are joined by Mahlet Reddy, who is an Executive Director of the Women's Economic Empowerment Africa. Vicky Phillips, you are CEO of the National Center on Education and Economy in the United States. Professor Todd Lubert, you're from the Institute of Psychology at the Université Paris-Cité, and you work on the potential of creativity. Michael Fong, you're Executive Director of the Institute for the Future of Education and at Technologico de Monterrey. And Borhene Chakroun, who is Director for Policies and Lifelong Learning Systems at UNESCO and Supervisor of the UNESCO Global Coalition for Education. Thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. And so maybe I can start directly in our first part around the landscape of work and skills and how it's changing. So perhaps I can begin with you, Borhene, by asking you if you can give us your and UNESCO's understanding in global trends in education and for workforce development.
Thank you, Irene, and good afternoon to you, also to all my colleagues here, and thank you for the Learning Planet Institute and the UNESCO Chair for organizing such important discussion today, and very important topic as well. Let me put my first introduction on around maybe 3 points that I think are important to a bit set the scene and how we see it from UNESCO perspective. First of all, from UNESCO, we can see that while we made a progress in advancing education, in ensuring that more young people are in the schools, but we see much more challenges in terms of the equity and inclusion and the quality of education. We see a number of young people who should be in school who are not, 250 million, just to give a figure. We know that we have more than 750 million people who are illiterate, and we know also that billion of people who need to upskill, reskill, or acquire new skills in their life cycle, and take into account the changes that you mentioned in the introduction. So while we see progress in some areas, but we see, I would say, persisting challenges in terms of the quality, the equity and inclusion. We know that intersection of, I would say, disparities are real. If you are a woman in rural area, you are in some cases not accessing education, or you drop out from education. If you are in a conflict zone, you are also prevented from access to education. And we look at it from a right-based perspective. Education is a human right, and we advance it as a human right. And take into account the changes, of course, this means that we are looking at how the right to education is evolving, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. But if I take the, I would say, more the demand side, and what is the demand for skills, how the labor market is changing, the workforce development is changing, we can, of course, speak about different sources of changes in terms of the demand for skills. Some of them, and I'm sure my colleagues will be referring to that, changes in terms of the labor market, jobs that are changing, although we know now that while the forecast on changes in terms of occupations are accurate, the pace of those changes are not always accurate. And when we look at the forecast, for example, that were conducted in 2010 in terms of million of jobs that will be call it destroyed, and we don't see that. We see more, I would say, nuanced approach, but maybe we'll come back to that later. But one, I would say, source of changes in terms of the demand for skills is obviously a change in the labor market, change in demand for skills. But there is also, and I think it's very important in our discussion today, there is also a demand for skills that is coming from societal needs. For example, more skills for citizenship, for participation in societies, in communities, for engagement, and the actions that we see on the ground in terms of youth engaged for climate change, for example. Those are set of a set of skills that are not necessarily coming directly or stemming from a change in occupation, but they are stemming from the societal demand. And the third source of demand for skills is, I would say, the international community. There is sometimes either a push for some set of skills. For example, take the transversal skills, or those different skills that we call soft skills, A lot of push is coming from international organization, from World Economic Forum and other areas, and they are important. But there are also a push, for example, including from UNESCO, to say we need global global citizens. And of course, that's about intercultural dialogue. That's about acceptance of others. So there are other sources of, I would say, demand for skills that we need to take into account. And then the last one is the demand for skills that we don't know yet, and that probably we'll need to respond to. And to finish with my first intervention, for us, this leads to an attention to a right to education within a lifelong learning perspective. And that means that we need to take the right to education from placing it in this lifelong and life-wide. And that means acquiring skills in different settings, including in communities, in the workplace, in schools, in institution, and being able to connect those learning spaces and valorizing the learning happening in different spaces. But for us, this means entitlements for lifelong learning. This means supporting individuals in engaging lifelong learning. But this comes, of course, with the challenges, and maybe we'll come back to that in the second tour. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Borhene, for this intervention. Very clear and structured. And Michael, from your perspective at the Institute for the Future of Education, how do you see the future of education evolving? And what emerging skills do you believe will be crucial?
Thank you, Irina, and thank you to the UNESCO Chair of Learning Science and Learning Plan Institute for inviting me to this conversation. As Borhene had alluded to, I think we're facing with many disruptions as we look at the changes in industry, in jobs and skills, but also needs of society. And I suggest that there are perhaps 6 major disruptions that we need to contend with. One of which is the rise in technology. We've seen really the extensive use of digital skills. We're talking about artificial intelligence and how that's changed the nature of jobs and skills, but also the way that we live our daily lives. And we're also living longer due to advances in medical science, and many of us have to contend with multiple careers throughout our life. Shifting demographics in different countries, in advanced economies, birth rates have declined significantly. And there's a youth dividend in many developing countries. So dealing with these demographic characteristics and the kinds of skills needed to lead productive lives is a major disruption that we have to contend with. And with all the geopolitical shifts and movements around the world, global supply chains are being affected. So entire industries are relocating and lots of changes as a result of that. Climate change being a big factor that we have to be concerned about as well. How do we promote greening of jobs, green skills? And that's going to be very important. And in the recent years, we had to deal with the global pandemic that affected labor forces around the world. So all these changes and disruptions clearly has major impact on our companies, on our labor force, on our societies. And some jobs have become obsolete. Other jobs and new capabilities are now becoming much more prominent and needed in different sectors of the industry. So as we look at the future of work and future of societies, it is clear that we need to have ongoing learning opportunities. And as Borhene had talked about, lifelong learning as human rights, basic human rights, but lifelong and life-wide learning, I think it's going to become very important. What is clear is that we need to continue learning throughout our lives. So as we think about the future of work, future societies, we need to think about the future education as well. And I suggest that we need a number of paradigm shifts to be able to deal with these major disruptions. First is to move from the traditional educational systems that we have, which tend to be limited to specific academic pathways and particular vocational pathways, to a much broader range of modular learning pathways, multiple modular learning pathways that can cater to the learning needs of different segments of our population. I liken this as moving from the narrow city streets of education to the wide highways of learning for all. The second shift is to go from a front-loaded education model where we invest heavily in the first 12 to 16 years of an individual's educational career to one that's much more lifelong in nature. so that everyone could have the chance to keep coming back into an educational system that is inclusive and supportive throughout a person's life. And third is to move from a classroom-based, predominantly classroom-based learning model to one that incorporates work-based learning and blended learning modes. And this, I think, is necessary as we think about the rapid shifts in the needs of industry in terms of the latest skills that's required for different jobs. Very importantly is to also shift from a focus on content and technical knowledge and skills to nurturing transversal and adaptive skills, not just amongst our young students coming through formal education systems, but also with the general population and workforce that has to continue to deal with different disruptions throughout their lives. And some of those transversal skills, I think Borhene had alluded to in his opening intervention. And finally, the shift that I think needs to happen is to move from a public sector provision model, predominantly public sector provided model for education, to one that includes significant elements of public-private partnership. The investment needed for a lifelong and life-wide learning education system is going to be way too large for just public sector investments alone. So at the Institute for Future Education, our mission is to transform higher education and lifelong learning to improve the lives of millions of people around the world, embracing these paradigm shifts and this model that I talked about. And I think there are, let me just summarize my intervention, opening intervention with 4 key themes that I think we need to think about as we talk about the future education. One is around making sure that future education is fit for purpose, that we are constantly reviewing our pedagogical model. We're reviewing the way we use technology to make sure that the education that we offer in different institutions, in different learning opportunities, is fit for purpose for the needs of industry and society. And the second theme is around the future education being adaptive to cater to the needs of learners across different contexts, delivering over education over various channels and learning modes, and to use developments like alternative credentials, micro-credentials, to cater to the needs and learning pace of different students and learners. And the third theme revolves around inclusion, to provide learning opportunities for all. I think now more than ever, we have access to content technology that can be used in ways to reach to a much wider segment of the population, including those that are in underprivileged and marginalized settings. And the final theme is around relevance. To meet the evolving needs of industry and society, we need to make sure that the educational model has strong involvement of the industry and be able to continue to update our curriculum and what we are delivering to learners of different backgrounds. So the future education needs to be fit for purpose, adaptive, inclusive, and relevant. It forms a nice little acronym, FAIR. Future education needs to be fair. So let me pause there, and I think we can have a further discussion later on in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It seems an opportune moment to turn to Todd. Your work focuses on creativity. Could you share with us how you see the role of creativity shaping the future of professions?
Oh, sure. Well, thanks to the organizers and all that have invited me to this panel. And I first want to say that we see creativity defined as a capacity that can be developed. And it's a capacity to engage in original thinking that has value and meaning. So, and from our perspective in psychology, we work on this topic of how to help develop it. But in terms of the current, let's say, state of affairs, creativity is considered one of the 21st century skills, called part of the 4 C's, together with creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, that are supposed to be important for future job success and life success and societal growth. And as you know, PISA, the PISA testing program of OECD, recently had creativity as its special topic. And so the results are coming out of how more than 600,000 15-year-olds in a large number of countries are able to engage with this capacity. But essentially, if you look at learning programs, they often say they value creativity, but not necessarily so much as being done to support it. And secondly, if you look at jobs and how they might evolve, you'll see that in almost every job, there is at least some room for creative thinking to add value in the job. Some of these jobs are called creative jobs or creative industries, like being a writer, being an artist, being a designer, okay? But other jobs like being a manager, being a teacher, being a lawyer, etc., there's an aspect of the work that involves some original thinking at some points, okay? And there are even other jobs where it's less obvious. For example, a firefighter, but occasionally they need to invent a new technique to fight a fire because nothing is in the book, let's say. So as you have trends like AI, generative AI, and other AI systems that are able to take over some tasks, this pushes people towards the part of their job which AI has less capacity to do. And so we see a increasing interest in the creative aspects of jobs. And you might call this an intense phase of creative destruction in the Schumpeter sense that as a new tool comes out, like generative AI, in fact, it destroys some of what people already did and opens up for new stuff. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's several angles that have been tested as valuable and efficient to help people gain in creative capacity. And so, you know, these could be discussed and cited as ways to integrate in the future of education. But I think that there is even, just to finish up, a shift in what creative capacity is about, thanks to the changing landscape. Because in the past, it was kind of like you can get all the ideas yourself and be a source of original thinking. Now, and maybe work with other people in the team to do it too. Now, with new tools like generative AI, getting a lot of ideas became somewhat easier, but the critical judgment aspect became somewhat more difficult. So even we see a shift within the creative capacity skill itself for the future of education.
Thank you, Todd. I was wondering, do you have any tips for the students in the audience or for the teachers on how do you efficiently train creativity? Are there some general like exercises or tricks, or is it really specific to every type of activity?
Yeah, there's some general ways. Of course, being creative in each activity is a little bit specific, okay? It's like saying, we're going to train you to be good at sports, but to be good at tennis is not the same training as to be good at swimming, obviously, right? So it's kind of like that. But one thing you can train in general is what we call the ingredients to be creative in almost any domain, like mental flexibility, risk-taking attitude, openness of your mind. And you can train these through some exercises or life experiences or educational experiences. They're kind of basic components. Another way is you can train some creative thinking skills or techniques, they call them tools in your toolkit. And there's a lot of these. It's partly which ones should you know how to use because they're relevant to your task. But you can learn these creative thinking techniques, let's say. There's lots of material on them. So it's like building a toolkit. And most of them can apply to whatever topic, in fact. And finally, there's another way to train stuff is through well, in school, through project work, where the goal is to partly be creative, but even extracurricular activities. Like we've done a lot of studies lately on gameplay, board games, and we've identified some board games that are so-called by us creative ones, because to get the points, you got to invent some new idea in the game. And if you play those in your free time, or if you're at school in your lunchtime, whatever, or in business at your lunchtime, we found it actually stimulates, in general, your creative mind. So for whatever task you do. And so anyway, that's a quick answer. That's the basic answer to your question. Thank
you very much, Todd, for these insightful moments. I let know our organizers of board games at lunch that actually they stimulate creativity. Now to you, Vicky, given your experience at the National Center on Education and Economy, how do you envision reimagining education systems to meet the future needs?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to be on the panel. And I'm really appreciating how aligned so many of us are, from Michael's 4 points to the role that creativity is going to play. As our name indicates, we work at the intersection of education and the economy. So we study high performers, rapid risers, and exceptional innovators around the globe. We nurture visionaries, we innovate for what's next, and we build diverse coalitions to accelerate impact and the transformation of education. And I want to just note that we're big believers in the voice and agency of young people. Like, we recognize how much the world has changed around our students, and that education really has to evolve to meet those needs. And we see young people as solution seekers and as powerful allies in that transformation. Recently, one of the things we did was to distill decades of research around the world's top performing and rapid rising systems, and created something we call kind of a blueprint that has 4 core elements in it. It is the elements of what successful systems do, their dynamic interconnections, how those pieces come together to create high levels of student performance. And it is a direction of travel, if you will, a springboard for possibility for leaders who want to redesign their systems in ways that get outsized results for young people and end up getting some of the outcomes that we've been talking about. So I'll give you a very quick whirlwind tour, because it will mirror and reinforce some of what's already been said. That research has 4 components. The first is about preparing young people for long life learning. And you heard Michael talk explicitly about this. And long life rather than lifelong is an intentional nod to that reality that we are all living longer, and that young people will need the education and skills to thrive across extended lifetimes. So that excellence all the way through their school career needs to be bolstered by pathways to life after school that, as Michael said, are modular, meaningful, accessible, aligned with an evolving economy, that gives them on-ramps into the future and helps them have ample opportunities for upskilling and reskilling. In fact, we have to start to think 0 to 100 and think about how everybody gets the opportunity to upskill and reskill over the course of their lifetime. And when we think about outcomes for young people, we think about the academic outcomes they need, but also the habits of learning and well-being, the contemporary skills they need for the modern workplace, and the kinds of community skills they need to be those global citizens and contributors and experience that level of creativity that we just mentioned. The second piece that we found as we studied all these places was that we also, in addition to thinking about what young people need, we have to think about the educators who are in front of them and what they need. So we need to cultivate high capacity, forward thinking educators and make sure that they have the skills and capacities needed to provide a future ready education, because we know that they also will need upskilling, given the fact that there's a future being shaped by AI and other advancing technologies that demand really significant shifts in reimagining time and space and when, where, and how education happens, as Michael also mentioned, and that we need to think about in both those ways, students and educators, how we modularize and really advance their learning. The third thing that we found was that we need to join forces to ensure that learners thrive, that we need to recognize that learning happens everywhere. We have to blur the lines between formal and informal schooling. We need to treat the broader community as a learning laboratory for young people. We have to make sure that young people develop all of those habits, from mastering academic subjects to learning and well-being. We have to provide intentional support for those struggling and give opportunities for others to advance. So we need to bring institutions and sectors together and wrap them around young people to ensure that they thrive. And then the third thing we found about transforming education systems and what successful leaders are doing is that they think very differently about leadership, that the fundamental leadership that we've experienced around the world is kind of the floor now and not, it's no longer the ceiling, and that we have to revisit some assumptions about the purpose of schooling. You heard Michael talk about this, and then you heard a piece around creativity that demands that as well, and thinking differently about when, how, where, by whom education can be delivered. We have to build much broader and deeper coalitions and think about a compelling vision for the future of learning and work, and enroll those coalitions in helping shape that vision. We need to understand what the best in the world is doing, not as a cookie cutter recipe, but as a springboard to what's possible, and begin to take that knowledge and shape transformation of education in our own context and our own communities. And I think most importantly, and everybody has said this, that at every step of the way, we have to be very cognizant that the students are entering a future in which how people work, the problems they need to solve, the decisions they need to make, and the skills they need are going to be ever changing. And education has to ever evolve with all those possibilities, including making sure that we use time, talent, and technology in new ways and encourage innovation. So the blueprint really talks about all four of those things: preparing young people for long life learning, cultivating high capacity, forward-thinking educators, joining forces to ensure that students thrive, and thinking differently about system leadership and how we shape systems to wrap around young people and communities. And those four things are what we see successful systems around the world actually doing to transform and to meet the kinds of needs that both Todd and Michael talked so eloquently about.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I was actually wondering, like, you are working on these things and actually making them like appear in practice. And do you have, like, right now in your mind one example, one practical example on how you do or did, or some people around you did something that is inspiring and goes into the right direction? Just let people imagine what it looks like.
Yeah, there are a number of things. I mean, we work to achieve vertical transformation, meaning that when we go in a place, we are often working with policymakers and helping them change not just one policy, but change their whole policy set to enable these kinds of things to happen. But at the same time, we're working with them, we're working with young people and teachers and education leaders on the ground to start to enact some of these pieces so that people can see that it's truly possible to achieve. So that vertical piece is incredibly important to us, because that's how we believe you get lasting and sustainable change.
So top down and bottom up at the same time.
And inside out and outside in, all of that.
All of it. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. I'll take some time to just read some of the questions that we have in the chat. There's one from Yona Galeron for Michael, where she says that basically the characteristics that Michael delineated with when he was saying that we need to build like education that is fit for purpose and relevant. She says that it seems to her more appropriate in defining training, not education. How do we include the need for nurturing the personal development of our students, the construction of their personality, and of their generation as a social group? Without these aspects, it seems to me we create workforce, which is vital, I agree, but not citizens. End of citation.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the question from Yona. I think when we think about education, one of the things that we always trip up over is that artificial dichotomy that we put in between what we think about traditional education and what we think about workforce development and training. In envisioning the future education, I think we need to encompass and build in all these elements, not just for young students and young people coming through our formal education system, of course, forming the individual, making sure that they become active and engaged citizens. That's very important. But I would argue that we need to think about that for older segments of our population as well, because of the changing and evolving nature of skills, competencies, both soft skills and technical skills. And what does it mean to lead a productive and engaged life throughout our lifetimes? And too little attention has been paid, I think, to older adults, including those in the workforce. So in my earlier comments, I did talk about moving from content-based technical skills to much broader transversal skills and embedding those as we think about training. We should think about the traditional training as incorporating these broader skills and competencies that are needed for the entire population. So I think we need to think about education as a much more integrated offering within a country, within a system that encompasses learners from all these different backgrounds, and to incorporate both the job-related skills, but also what does it mean to be an active, engaged, and productive citizen.
Thank you, Michael. I see Borhene has raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you, Rina. It's just a very quick reaction. I think we need to nuance a bit the discussion here. First of all, we need to understand the economic fabrics in different contexts. Not all economies are advanced and technologically advanced economies. You have economies where the informal economy remains very large, and we have no evidence that it is shrinking. We have some economies that are based on natural resources and others that are more manufacturing, others are mixed. So I think when we are speaking about the demand for skills, we need to be careful and take into account the economic fabric in different contexts. The second point also related to the learning and the learning opportunities. First of all, we need to acknowledge the digital divide, for example, and that today 2.6 billion people are not connected to internet. And that the learning opportunities that are offered to them are much less than what is offered elsewhere. But even in advanced economies, when we look at results, for example, from PIAC, we can see that low-skilled adults have very less, I would say, appetite for learning, and that the system is not necessarily equitable. So I think we need to nuance a bit our discussion as we are speaking about a global perspective. Some economies are different from others. Some learning systems are different from others. Where we need to be also context is that the solutions that are relevant in specific economic level or in specific context might not be relevant in others, and that we would need to have a much more, I would say, creative solution to take the point on creativity and look at what can drive learning. In maybe local communities, what drives learning is a community learning center that is offering maybe social services, economic, and then learning opportunities. In others, it can be, I would say, an adult, and Michael was referring to senior, for example. We can see, and we see emerging now in aging economies, in particular, learning opportunities for senior persons. And the lifelong learning entitlement doesn't end at the retirement age. So I think we need to nuance a bit our discussion. Otherwise, we may put the box for everybody and straitjacket. There are differences and there are different realities, and we will need to take this into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Borhene, for this intervention. Indeed. Maybe it's a great transition for the next part, where we wanted to talk more about like the economic and social implications of job markets and education. And I'd love to hear Mahlet who is an executive director of the Women's Economic Empowerment in Africa and global focal point for the Global Youth Caucus for Decent Work and Sustainable Economies. Could you give your perspective on key trends on what's happening in the job market across Africa?
Thank you for having me here today. It's a great honor to speak about the issue that's very close to my heart. I thank Learning Planet for inviting me here. I'd be very happy to share insight on key trends in African job markets as my perspective as women, I suppose, Director for Women Economic Empowerment Africa and the global focal point for decent jobs and sustainable economies within UNMTCWA. To start, it's very important to understand that African job markets are facing both significant challenge and opportunities at the same time. Youth unemployment and underemployment are particularly concerning. With over half of the continent population is under age of 25, while this is a demographic trend, is often referred as youth bulge without strategic interventions. It could quickly turn into missed opportunities or worse as a source of social and economic instabilities. The main question we need to answer is not just how to create the job, but how to make sure these jobs are sustainable and available to everyone. Technology, especially like the AI, is changing the way we work. We all are been talking about how AI is changing many traditional jobs and replacing traditional jobs are being replaced by machines. This means we have to prepare our young people for a new kinds of work that did not exist before. One of the prominent trends we're seeing is the need in demand of digital skills. With a global digital transformation, which is very accelerating, there is a growing need in African economies to equip our youth with the skills in areas like software development, data analysis, digital marketing. We can take example of countries like Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa are leading the way in developing technology hubs to create employment opportunities in Africa. However, we can tell these models across the continent remains a challenge in line with a gig economy is rapidly expanding in Africa, which offers some flexibility and income generation opportunities, especially for young women. But it's essential to emphasize that many of these jobs like protection, which can leave the workers vulnerable, addressing through policy frameworks that recognize gig workers' rights into decent works condition is crucial for long-term sustainability, because we're talking about decent jobs and making it sustainable for everyone. Another thing is like agriculture remains one of the largest employment sectors in Africa, yet it's often goes underutilized as the path to meaningful youth employment. There is a strong movement towards modernizing agriculture through digitalization. It's common that we have been listening to digitalization, agriculture and digitalization like very often these days, aiming to make farming more appealing to the youth. I believe by integrating technology and sustainable practice, we can unlock vast potential in agribusiness, creating more jobs along the value chain from production to processing and logistics and marketing. And one of the most important things we can do is to start teaching skills early at the elementary and secondary school levels. It's too late to start preparing the future when students reach universities. We need to change the way young people think about work, skill building. Also, we need to work on TVET, the way we see TVET and polytechnics, because we can create more jobs in polytechnics as well. Instead of just focusing on traditional jobs, we should teach them how to create their own jobs like their own jobs, and be ready for any challenge, any changes and challenge coming in the future. Another key trend is significant push entrepreneurship as a solution of unemployment. This could start in the young age by encouraging young people to start their own business that succeed. These young entrepreneurs need more than just the training, accessible. We need more affordable. Access to affordable financing, mentorship, and also market is crucial. It's important fostering support an ecosystem where their ideas could turn in viable business. This support is especially vital for young people, young women who are facing additional barriers in accessing credit and other resources. When we talk about increasing the need of like for sustainable economies and existing jobs, that we also need to talk about to reduce unemployment effectively. The government should get involved with stakeholders. We must align with the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly SDG 8, and how we can connect SDG, like the two SDGs, like the decent jobs and education together, which SDG 8 focus on promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. We need policies that go beyond job creation to emphasize job qualities and right of workers. African job market must adapt technology shifts, invest in agriculture, entrepreneurship, and adopt policies to prioritize decent works.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hamlet. Very insightful. And also a different perspective here in terms of age group. Louise, as a student, how do you see like the skills that you are trying to learn, and how is education preparing you for them, or not preparing actually?
Yes, good point. Thank you, Irina, and thank you for the Learning Planet Institute and UNESCO also to include some of the students' voices. So just a bit of background, because we've been talking about creative skills. I'm in a Master in Learning Sciences, but I initially graduated from textile design. So my whole study in academia was, before the master, was about focusing on how to develop this creativity and to be prepared for the creative job market. So we were seeing this AI coming and the new technologies coming, and this is where the shift on actually creativity is more about the critical thinking and how to critically choose in between all the choices, and we have more and more choices to make. So and I think going to learning sciences, then there was a shift also on where those creative skills could impact my work in the learning sciences. And definitely it takes a different shape. It's about adaptation, flexibility, I guess plasticity. And yeah, I guess for me, the future skills that we would need, or that we need right now, actually, it's not really for the future, but it's for right now, is definitely being able to develop our reflectiveness and emotional intelligence. And it's something that I think creative skills support very well, because we learn how to look at ourselves, like reflect on ourselves, but also reflect on the system we live in and the society. And it's really about the awareness of the system. And if we have this awareness, I do think it links with what was mentioned before, the citizenship and the societal demands for the job market on that. And also it would lead to definitely better collaboration and better inclusiveness on the job market. And I guess another point would be also to have this confidence or this trust in getting into the unknown, or like the uncertainty of the world as it is right now. And maybe here thinking about this role of teaching, and maybe going from teaching to having more like a guidance for the students, and be aware that we don't, like, everyone doesn't have obviously the solution, but we have tools and methodologies to go through it. So more like supporting the students on the way, and definitely like having agency and being able to think outside of the box is really, I think, the most important thing for the job market as it is right now. And well, I'm talking about the French job market as I know it, to be very precise. And I guess, yeah, I would say, as you were saying, Irina, education is not preparing us for some of those skills, but there's a lot of things that that is already done. I think education is really this perfect time of learning how we can dream or push for like the impossible. Maybe we will never reach it out, but still we need this guidance and being able to learn against the fear, I guess. I also think that the education has to be related to the global system, but it also has to be grounded to the local needs. And this is where you find meaning in what you are learning in your education. And this link with the job market, you have apprenticeship, you have internship, but definitely having more of the employers' voices inside the university or inside the schools, and more dialogue in between students and employers, I think that would be very beneficial, definitely. And yeah, interdisciplinarity, being able to work in between silos, and that goes with like exchanging with students and professionals, and also, but this is my very own opinion of a previous designer, but being able to learn with art practice, if possible, as it is not only putting the knowledge in our brain, but also recognizing that us as a body, we also have a knowledge that is situated, and we sense the system where we are at. So yeah, I think working on that, but that's more of an open question. Would be very interesting to see the transfer of skills that you can have in the job market afterwards.
Thank you very much, Lise. It was rich in perspectives. And you maybe detailed also what are transferable skills. You were talking a lot about that. So it's nice because it makes a link in between the what we were saying earlier about transferable skills. Yeah. And Zoe, can you share also as a student your insights on how you prepare your career and your expectations for the future job market?
Yes, sure. Good afternoon first, and thank you, Irina. Yeah, I'm a new M2 I have a master's student actually at the Learning Planet Institute, and I studied architecture at the Technical University of Munich before. So I also have a creative background, just as Louise. And yeah, I would try to give you a brief insight into my personal perspective, which is built on my experience of studying mainly in Germany and now in France as well. So as a student, the world of professional practice can actually seem very overwhelming. And I, as I said, personally experienced that in the field of architectural education specifically and creative studies in general. So the first thing I understood quite early on is that the job market is far from static. So for graduating students in architecture, for example, they face a very different landscape today compared to those who graduated even just 1 or 2 decades ago. My mom studied architecture as well, and when she graduated, for example, 3D programs were just introduced. She learned to draw every single line of a complex facade by hand with the shadows and everything. And I only took a few drawing classes in my very first year to then just sit in front of a computer for the rest of the 3 years and in front of my 3D models. And interestingly, when I graduated just a few years ago, kind of a similar thing happened, and technology surprised us all with this boom of artificial intelligence and augmented reality. So we're already feeling kind of behind and old school again, even though we just graduated, because students now learn how to implement those new devices and new technologies. So that can be overwhelming, but it's also a chance, I think, for constant learning, as mentioned before, and adapting your skills. So one of the biggest challenges may be how quickly things are changing in this world in general. And apparently there's an increasing demand, I think, for professionals now who do not only understand design, but also technology and system integration. And means that the job market isn't just about traditional roles like the architect or the designer anymore. There are also more interdisciplinary roles emerging. So positions at the intersection of architecture, technology, and most importantly, sustainability, of course, which is adaptable to other professions as well, I think. And despite all these exciting changes, I think one of the in my education is the lack of emphasis on practical and hands-on skills that are essential for today's job market, I would say, because we spend a lot of time learning all the theories and technical skills related to design and structures and history. But when it comes to things like running a business, project management, and client relations, those are often just left to be learned on the job. And I think this is not necessarily a problem in general if the universities would include practical experience more into the curriculum already and make the direct collaboration part of the studies. So yeah, architects are actually doing so much more than just designing buildings. They are concept makers and mediators even between all different sorts of people. And the key is to communicate between all of them efficiently. So the point is that there is an issue of interpersonal skills as well. So things like networking, negotiation, and leadership that are so important for career advancement. But architecture schools and maybe most of the university in general tends to focus so much on the technical and theoretical side that it's easy to forget these soft skills, which are just as important, if not even more important, in a profession where teamwork is key in the end. So I think that mentoring and learning from other people who have already achieved something that one wishes to achieve is still crucial and could also be taken more into account in education. So yeah, in my opinion, there are 2 main aspects that are the most important for the future job market, especially in those creative fields that I was talking about, but actually for every discipline maybe. So the first thing is adaptability and continuous learning, because the job market, I think, will definitely reward those who adapt quickly to changing technologies and new methodologies. And as industries evolve, learning will have to be a continuous process. And as a student, and for me, I think it's important to embrace a mindset of lifelong learning already, and to be open to new tools and stay informed about emerging trends. And yeah, the second thing is the cross-disciplinary collaboration, because the architects of the future will likely need to work alongside professionals from diverse fields, including urban planning, engineering, or fashion, but also data science, environmental science, or biology to create totally new structures and new materials. And I think the ability to collaborate across disciplines will become a key skill in the job market for everyone. And we should be able to just communicate with each other and with all of them. Yeah, and I myself, I'm very interested in just further exploring the interdisciplinary part of architecture through research. And that is also why I'm here at LPI, because yeah, there are so many different students here with maybe even more different backgrounds who come together. And this is, as I already said, I think exactly where I personally see the future of our job market and of work. And of course, it's hard to predict exactly, but I think the tendency is much more towards transdisciplinary work in a diverse team rather than this single field work. And we just need to learn to be open to new technologies and all of those new people with a different expertise around us.
Thank you, Zoe. Very interesting, and it's also nice to hear that you just focus as much as on some of the things that, as the others who spoke earlier. So thank you for that. There is now a question from Olivier Brechard, who is asking basically on how can inspiring initiatives like OECD High Performing Systems Program or UNESCO's Happy Schools Network, along with diverse learning ecosystems such as Dream a Dream in Delhi or Friendship in Bangladesh or SSG University in Ghana, how can these work together to redefine education systems and promote a learning mindset that prioritizes human flourishing, well-being, social change, environmental awareness, even in challenging contexts? I don't know who is willing to try to respond to this question.
Well, I can speak just a moment for the high performing systems of tomorrow because NCE co-sponsors, co-designs that with OECD. We're partnering with them on it. We're finishing our third year, but much of the research I mentioned earlier, the kind of blueprint, which I took you a whirlwind tour through, you can find it on our website, reflects what that group is learning and experiencing, including thinking about how we anticipate the future. So one thing I didn't mention when I gave you the 4 kind of components of the blueprint earlier is that in it, there is a section, every one of those sections has a, what are people doing right now that's getting more outsized results for young people, but what are they also anticipating? Because the thing that's so important about these systems is they don't sit still. They continue to talk and evolve and learn and explore and innovate. And I think that is the going to increasingly be the hallmark of successful systems, that they do that. But you can read all that in the blueprint on our website.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, sharing is probably the first step on into how to collaborate better.
Well, other thing, I think somebody mentioned this earlier, there's so much we can learn looking across sectors too, so that we're not just looking at what we're thinking about in education and even business and industry, but that we are looking at what's happening in climate and other things, because the intersection, there's something important to be learned from the intersection of those sectors and people that are kind of working at those intersections.
Thank you, Vicky. Yeah. Applies to education as well as to what we teach. Yeah. Oh, Michael raised his hand. Go ahead, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to a point that I think Borhene had mentioned earlier, which is, I think, very important. While we are looking at some of the best practices in highly successful educational systems, and that's important, in trying to proliferate those practices within well-established educational ecosystems, that's great, right? We need to do that in a vertically, I think Vicky, you were saying a vertically integrated manner, working at policymakers, top down, bottom up. I think that's very important. So we need to continue to do that to shift the main system. But I think we also need to consider the context and needs of very, very different societies. And to adjust our interventions that fit the needs. Some of these needs will be more vocational in nature, and some of them would be targeted at some other areas. And I'll give you two examples of projects we're working on where this is really come to the fore. We've been working to bring digital skills development to Madagascar. And the context of Madagascar, and I think Marlet, you know that very well, is that it is one of the poorest countries in the world. And so jobs, the ability to get jobs, the ability to continue to work and learn on the side is so important, because they cannot take time off for studies. And we had to design interventions that were highly flexible with lots of on-ramps and off-ramps, so that you're not really taking time off to study. You are acquiring skills as you move towards becoming qualified for particular jobs in the digital realm. So that design focuses heavily on vocational oriented skills, to be able to get jobs, and not forgetting at the same time to build resilience skills that's needed for that workforce as well. In another project, this is in Mexico, we're reaching out to underprivileged youth in very poor communities in Mexico. And here we're trying to shape mindsets, in particular, embedding empathy into the course of learning, and using sophisticated AI backend, but a very low-tech front end with like 2G cell phones, WhatsApp messaging, to be able to get these youths to start exploring learning and creating new potential models of what success means in life, to shift mindsets and to move them away from less desirable trajectories. Let me put it that way. So again, see, that's very different context. And we have to make the best use of what we have in terms of resources, practices, to reach very different communities and to customize our interventions according to the needs. Thank you.
Wow, Michael, I just want to comment on that because I couldn't agree more. I think all these things we're talking about, none of it needs to be seen as kind of a cookie cutter or recipe. Everything has to be contextualized to local context. It's kind of directional, right? It's kind of a direction of travel that we see. And even in the research we're doing, it's not just high performers, it's some of the rapid risers around the world and some of the exceptional innovators that you start to see these elements emerging, but they emerge totally placed in the context of the country, the jurisdiction, the situation. So I think that's so important. And it also brought to mind, somebody mentioned earlier, the digital divide, because I also think there's a conversation to be had about being really clear about what technology can do and what it can't do. And just being clear that even as we close some of that digital divide, there's very, explicit things, particularly around creativity and other kinds of skills that young people are going to need that technology can't teach.
Thank you, Michael and Vicky, for these great examples and comments.
I think the point, sorry, Irina, I think the point is not what technology can teach, is what technology cannot do.
That's right.
Is the advantage that we have as a human, and that's part of the social interaction that is very important. That probably other set of skills that we will need to better identify and look at how we augment our capability with technology, but also how we are able to compete between brackets with the technology. I think the point that we are facing all as an international community, and of course in different contexts, in different ways, is that that level of uncertainty that we see. I mean, take, for example, the question of polarization of the labor market. I would say a few years ago, a lot of our attention, and I mean, Michael, you recall, because we have done part of the work a few years ago, we looked at it together. We were looking at the polarization of the labor market, thinking that labor market will be polarized with high-end type of skills and low-end type of skills, and that the intermediate level is shrinking and probably will fade. Today, with the AI, we see that that polarization maybe will not happen as we were thinking about it, and even high-end type of jobs are threatened and will be can be also replaced by technology. So it's our capacity to be able to anticipate, to think what are the changes, but eventually also to shape the changes. I think there isn't a fatality. There is also how we steer the technological change and how we steer that as a human being and as an international community. It requires multilateralism. It requires also cooperation and solidarity, which is not always easy as we know. But that's where organizations like Learning Planet, like your organization, like UNESCO, where countries can come together and can discuss and can come to some, I would say, consensus on how we can operate and what are the direction we are taking, like we have agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals, with the problem they have. And I see in the chat question regarding the silos, but still in 2015, as a human being, we came to a moment where we agreed on what we thought will be important for us. We have made progress, but we are off track on many of those SDGs. And the question for us today is where we are heading. Can we accelerate on achievement, but also thinking about post-2030? Some of them are related to technology impact, climate, demography. I think is very important. Michael, you referred to that. When we look at demography, it's very important to see how Africa is evolving, but also how other societies, and particularly advanced economies. So, and that will require different set of skills. If you are a retired person, you like to learn skills for life. You are not learning skills necessarily for jobs. At least we hope for you that you are learning for life. So those are things that we will need to take into consideration in our discussion, and in a way be self-reflective. What we forecasted a few years ago, probably there are direction, as you said, Vicky, but the pace is not always the same, and the pace will depend on social negotiation, on acceptance, eventually on our capability to engage with the technology, and definitely this requires this dialogue and this perspective, and young people have a role to play here as an agent of change and as co-creators. And I think that's something that is very important. The problem, and I finish with that, is that when we look at data, not from the colleagues from Louis and the colleague who with us in this discussion, but when we look at PISA results, for example, the expectation of youth are very narrow to very narrow set of jobs. If you take France, it's around more than 50% of young people are looking at 10 professions. But the labor market and the economy is much more diversified. And that requires more, of course, information and guidance, counseling, and opportunities, and opening those opportunities for young people, so that when we dismantle the cliche and the narrow thinking about how the labor market is evolving. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Borhene. Mahlet, did you raise your hand? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I did. I just want to add some points. I think I believe we need to work on the way we teach young people on the importance of skill like digital literacy or critical thinking in problem solving. alongside the traditional subjects of like maths and science. This skill will help them adopt the future job because now the young people are competing with the AI, and the AI is taking over the traditional jobs, and most jobs are being shifted to being worked by the machine. So like the young people are competing with the with the AI, plus the unemployment. So the young people from the early age need to have like the resource to equip themselves on to compete with the AI and work closely with the AI. These skills will help them like adopt the future jobs market, whether they're working for a company or creating their own job, like I said earlier. Employers also should shape their thoughts in school. Companies need to be involved in education by offering internship, apprenticeship, like said earlier before, so the student kids gain like real world experience. We all know like internships and apprenticeship are like being given like by universities and schools, but like it should come to the elementary and secondary schools, so the kids, so the young people will have like an idea what to expect. And another thing that I mentioned earlier was also like working on Tibet. Like we've been talking about like elementary school, secondary school, and university, like leaving Tibet behind. So we need to work on Tibet because most young people get experience on work and like actual skill in Tibet. So we should also like promote like Tibet for the younger generation, like in elementary and secondary school. This especially is important on industries like technology, healthcare, renewable energy, which are like the fast growing. And the other point that I would add is like education should not stop when you finish school. In today's world, people need to keep learning new skills through their career. Employers and government can help by offering affordable training programs, making it easier for the people to learn on their own. And this would close the gap.
Thank you. There is really one theme that coming over and over and again with you, Mahlid, is like this culture of lifelong learning that we really need to support. And it's actually a great switch of the educational system. So I'd love to hear you on how it can foster this culture of lifelong learning. How do you see the kind of educational world adapting to that?
I can start if you allow me. I will be very short because I'm looking at the time. First of all, I think we need to better define lifelong learning. At least from our perspective, lifelong learning starts from early learning and continue to adult and senior learning. So that's the vector of lifelong learning that's very important and the life cycle. Because sometimes the discussion on lifelong learning gets stuck into the adult learning. I think it's very important that we are clear that lifelong learning is from 0 to 100 as Vicky, and maybe more than 100, we hope as well. So it's also the different learning settings, community, workplace, school. I think we need more education, but not necessarily more schools. It is learning beyond the school's wall. So taking this formal, non-formal, and informal learning, but taking also the different learning spaces. I think it's very important when we are conceptualizing and thinking about lifelong learning, we take the complexity of the dimension and the complexity of purposes. We learn for job, but we learn also for leisure. We learn for life. We learn for engaging with communities, for engaging in societies. So I think it's very important. And I would say that the learning opportunities can happen in different settings. And today, probably, if you want to learn about how to address climate change, maybe it's better to learn it in an association or an NGO that is active in addressing climate change than learning it in school. So I think we need to take this broader understanding of the learning setting. Now, when it comes to what are the policy measures, and let me mention 3 policy measures that are important. One is to ensure that the learning pathways are shaped in a way that supports the needs of individuals and that accompany the learning needs. And technology can help in offering much more individualized learning pathways, but systems have to be also organized to accommodate those flexible learning pathways. The second is how we are able to validate prior learning or validate learning happening in different settings. And we have good examples like Portugal, like France, like South Africa, and other countries where there are much more advanced systems for offering validation of prior learning and recognizing learning. And the last aspect is how we, and I'm coming to the human right dimension, the lifelong learning entitlement. And this is work that we conducted with Michael, is looking at lifelong learning entitlements. For example, in Singapore, you have every citizens have a voucher to continue learning or to engage in lifelong learning from, I would say, young age to senior persons. In France also, we have learning accounts that offer individuals opportunities to learn. But there are different other schemes that are interesting to consider. So that lifelong learning entitlement is very important to have a more equitable and inclusive approaches toward lifelong learning. Over to you.
Do you want me? To give my opinion on it?
Sorry. Malet, do you want to speak?
Yeah, you asked me the question, like I'll just have a little time. I'll take a little time. So when I mean by supporting lifelong learning in elementary and secondary school, I'm thinking of like the involvement of creating an environment that fosters adaptability and asking questions and the love of learning, like creating of the love of learning, a shift towards like inquiry based on learning where students explore questions, solve like the real world problem, like connecting the young people in elementary and secondary school like with the real world problem by creating like this apprenticeship or like internship like at a young age. Also helps them like become self-directed learners, a crucial skill for a lifelong learning. And integrating like digital literacy and technology prepares like a student to access, evaluate, and apply information effectively, which would make continuous learning more accessible in the digital world that we're currently talking about. Also, will give them like a critical thinking, a problem-solving skill, and which we should emphasize across the subjects, enabling the students like to learn and adapt their encountering information. So schools can further support like life learning by teaching a practical skill, connecting academic concepts like in real life applications, like Montessori schools. I myself like went to Montessori schools, which helped me like to realize and work on different skills at a young age. Because I believe like this would help like students like see the relevance of like their learning beyond the classroom. So this is my thing that
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a very complementary aspect of how we get kind of we transform what we're doing actually in the continuous learning system to prepare for the lifelong learning. Thank you for that, Mahlet. I am like I'm looking on the time, so yes, I see that Michael and Todd want to intervene, and maybe I'll ask a last question, more focused maybe on the creativity aspects and like around how do we teach creativity and adaptability and all the transversal skills while being creative about our own educational system. So if we apply the creativity to the educational system, what would that look like? I don't know, Todd, are you inspired to answer such a question, such a bit of a meta question? And maybe Michael, you can add on that, and that will be kind of the conclusive remarks.
Okay, sure. I just say that teachers or educators have a job that has an aspect in which they can be creative in inventing new methods, new content, new ways to deploy ideas in front of students, but they don't always see their creative self concept as part of their job. And so that's something to develop in the teachers or educators, I mean. And even the educational system is traditionally kind of preparing you for what exists now, which is going to evolve a lot more quickly these days. So if the whole system was a little bit traditionally designed to educate you towards being ready for the job place and the society as we saw it when teachers were trained, we're always in a backlog of several decades, let's say. But I would like to comment on, in one sentence, first of all, on the lifelong learning. Of course, as our society and jobs are evolving more, the, let's say, more adult learners need more of their lifelong learning. There's more value to it for them, but also for the educators, there's more value because the whole society is aging, so there's more lifelong learners. So if we don't deal with them, we're going to be out of the job, let's say. And secondly, there was a lot of talk here about how AI or technology is in competition, is going to take our jobs and stuff, whereas that discourse is very common. But I think the whole vision has to change to how are we going to collaborate with these new tools in our jobs? It's not that it's us or them. What's left for us? Oh, this little teeny bit is the only thing left for us. If that's your whole vision, then the branch we're sitting on is getting shorter and shorter every day. So I'd just like to say that there's also an ideological shift maybe needed. Michael.
Thank you, Todd.
Thanks, Todd. And I'll be brief, given that we are over our time. So along the lines of creativity, I think we need to be creative about how we organize our educational systems as well. Through the discussions this morning, this afternoon, whether we're hearing from the students, or from international perspectives, or from academic perspectives, I think there's general consensus that we need to support lifelong learning. So what we need to get creative about is how do we make that happen in the context of different countries. In advanced economies like Singapore, like France and Canada and South Korea, as Borhene had mentioned, there is directed government efforts and public funding towards lifelong learning entitlements, creating that condition for learning for the wider population. In developing economies that are typically struggling to increase the quality of basic educational systems, it is very hard to imagine additional investments in lifelong learning. And that applies to Mexico and Latin America, where I'm based right now. And here, the success we're seeing is mobilizing industry and foundations, especially corporate foundations, to get behind interventions that could support lifelong learning across wider segments of population. So I think we need to be creative in finding approaches that actually work in these different settings. And that's my closing comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, all the members of this wonderful roundtable. Thank you for your different contributions. For myself, if I have some highlights, big topic around lifelong learning, how to adapt the initial learning system for that, how to adapt, how to create the opportunities so that people can work everywhere for their whole long lives on the different subjects that they will have to work on. How can we reimagine education by helping teachers also be creative about how they do their work? These are just some highlights that I am remembering right now. a lot also about like, well, we talked about inclusion of the diverse regions of the globe with all the specificities. And many, many more insights. So thank you very much for contributing to this talk. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, bye. Hope to.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the great discussion. Thank you.
Have a good
Bye.
Bye.